This video is about an additional step that is taken in the data cleaning process. So this is regarding the product sales by month function that I've created, which is just a function that would provide us with a data set that is more easily analyzed, or that can be used to create visualizations more easily. So let's start off with a visualization of what data we're starting off with. So this is the data set we are starting off with, the input data set. We've got a couple of IDs, the shopping cart, which is important for this video, the date, which is important, and essentially what we need to do is we need to find how many items were sold for each product per month, essentially aggregating by date and, or let's say by month and product. So for example, in June 2019, how many Lucent 330Ss were sold? How many Thunderlines were sold? So as we can see, the shopping carts format is a list of tuples. So this means that Lucent 330S, one of those products was sold in this transaction, 2 Thunderlines were sold in this transaction, 2 ice streams were sold in this transaction, and so on. So what we want to end up with essentially is something like this, right? We want the date, January 2019, Alcon 10 is the item, and 16 of them were sold. So how do we go from the input dataset to this dataset? And that is what we have addressed in, we find this, there we go. That is what we've basically done with this function. Product sales by month. So how many products were sold in each month. So let's maybe have a look at that. Right, we start off with our, I suppose I need to update these names so that they are more meaningful. These were sort of during the testing phase and I haven't updated them yet. Anyways, so we've isolated the required fields, which is the IDs, the date, and the shopping cart. Over here, essentially what's happening here is that we've been provided the products, right? Let's show you what I'm speaking about. So these products, right, have come in a list of tuples, but when we import this data set, what we get is these values as a string. So they don't come in as a list, they come in as a string, and we need to turn that string into a list that we can then manipulate, right? So what we are using then is just the eval function, which evaluates a specific input and turns it into something that can be used in Python. I'm sure there's a more sophisticated explanation for that, but essentially what eval does is it takes a string and evaluates it as a Python variable, I think is the correct way to say that. So essentially what that does is it turns that string of products into a list of tuples, and then we create a new row for each product, right? And that's what explode does. That's a very useful function. So now I've got a unique row, right? Next, what we want to do is we extract the quantity. So now we've got unique rows for each product, and each product is now a tuple consisting of a product name and a quantity sold. So what we want to do is we want to extract the quantity and put it in its own column. So you've got that quantity column. We extract the name from that tuple, product name, and place that into its own column. And then we want to reformat the dates. So because we want to aggregate by month, we need to take the dates and turn it into monthly variables. That happens a couple of steps down. However, at this stage, we're just reformatting the dates. to make sure that it's in a consistent format. I think this is a step that's not necessary because in the larger scheme of things, we are cleaning the dates in the first step. But when I created this, I wasn't viewing it as part of a whole. So this step becomes unnecessary if we've already taken a step of cleaning the data, and I'll show you what that means later, or I can show you now. So this is essentially the overall data cleaning process. In the first stage, we are doing some date cleaning, which essentially reformats all the dates to a consistent format. And if we do that, then this date formatting won't be necessary. Next, we extract the specific columns that we need, and in this case we just need the date, the product, and the quantity. And then what I mentioned earlier about reformatting to just a month, let's say you've got a date which is the 17th of June 2019. Essentially this step will turn that into the 1st of June 2019 so that we can aggregate by month. Essentially it turns it to a monthly period as opposed to a specific date in the month, and that's what we want in order to analyze sales per month. We don't need the granularity of which date in the month. And then we are aggregating by date and product name, and that's essentially what we end up with. So in this step, which is the .py file, the idea is that daily or weekly or however frequently you would like to run this process, you would just run this file. And at the moment we're exporting to a CSV. However, the ideal situation is that you are inserting this data into a database, and then you've got a visualization tool which is automatically reading the updated data from the database. And I think the next step, or the next video perhaps, would be me creating a database and then connecting that database to some type of visualization tool which automatically updates the visualizations. Yeah, so essentially what happens then is you are left with something like this, and then you can mess around with this and see what you'd exactly what you'd like to look at. Let's certainly a lot easier and more useful to have a data set like this as opposed to the one that we started out with, right? You can format this properly and turn this into a more useful visualization. So that's the idea with this video, is just to demonstrate that it's with the data cleaning process and thinking about what you start out with, such a messy data set, and being able to turn that into a clean data set like this that is much more useful for analysis.